I might just be the first man in history to file for divorce because his wife got rich. And not without reason. I caught wind of her affair in the making, just one step away from crossing the line for good. Sure, it hurt at first. The betrayal, the disappointment. But it didn't take long for me to see things clearly. Honestly, I saw this coming 5 years ago when her company landed its first round of venture capital. From there, everything just took off. They say money changes men. But it damn sure changes women, too. What Anna didn't know was that I'd overheard her little chat with Janet about her extracurricular interests. I was standing right outside the study, coffee in hand, when the conversation started. Anna, that Henry Rockefeller from the news station, he's not bad. What's the deal with you two? Janet teased. Anna replied lazily, he's a little clingy. Then why the hell did you give him a Maserati? You can't just throw money around like that. My fingers froze mid-sip. A Maserati? Anna's voice came again, tired and indifferent. It's just a car. Janet laughed. Then I'll help you keep him on the hook. Who knows? Maybe you'll change your mind. Do whatever you want. That was it. The conversation moved on to some business collaboration, as if none of it really mattered. Just two women sipping tea and gossiping on a sunny afternoon. But that coffee? It burned a hole straight through my gut. I didn't sleep a single minute that night. And the irony? When we first got married, we couldn't even afford a wedding reception. Now she's planning a lavish ceremony to make up for it. Guilt, maybe. But apparently not enough to stop her from chasing other men. Funny how hearts change. Funny how money clouds everything. This marriage? It's over. And I need to end it fast, before anything changes. Our meeting was set at a cafe. Kind of ironic, the moment I walked in, the flat-screen TV hanging above the counter was broadcasting a financial talk show hosted by none other than Henry Rockefeller. Of course. That's probably where Anna first crossed paths with him. A charming young host, all smiles and polish, eloquent and razor-sharp with his words. He carried himself with ease, even in front of those billionaire titans who normally intimidate the average person into silence. Brian, my old college buddy and now a top-tier attorney, was already waiting at a corner table. He caught me staring at the screen and chuckled. George, you know, Henry kind of looks like you. That lit a fuse in me. I snapped back, how is he like me, ? Henry's the type who oozes soft energy and staged charm. I'm a straight-up, no-bull kind of guy. Brian blinked, confused. Seriously, everyone says that. Even at the last alumni gathering, your name came up when he was on TV. I scoffed. Unfortunate for me. I wasn't in the mood to waste another second talking about Henry Rockefeller. I cut straight to the point. I want a divorce from Anna. Brian nearly dropped his coffee. You've got to be kidding. You finally made it, and now you want out? Do I strike you as the kind of man who jokes about marriage? I rolled my eyes. Everyone in our college circle remembered how I threw caution to the wind and married Anna when her company was on the verge of collapse. So I didn't blame Brian for being shocked. You married her when she was broke and falling apart. Now she's the richest woman on the Upper East Side, and you're walking away. Gotta say, George, that's bold. I leaned back in my chair, unfazed. Brian, I could handle the broke woman she used to be. But this Empire Queen version of her? You think I stand a chance? You've worked on so many divorce cases, I added flatly. I figured you, of all people, would understand. Because if anyone knows the dark corners of human nature, it's a divorce attorney. Brian went quiet for a while before cautiously asking, did Anna cheat? She's only one step away from cheating. Then why not confront her? Ending everything now feels a little brutal. I gave a cold laugh. If I don't act first, she will. You tell me, Brian, based on the cases you've handled, who ends up with more in a divorce? The one who's still in love, or the one who feels guilty? He didn't answer, but he didn't need to. We both knew the truth. Once her new lover officially replaces me, my leverage evaporates. Whatever she gives me then will depend entirely on her mood and mercy. And I'm not the type to sit around hoping for scraps. Brian let out a low whistle. George, you're so damn calm, it's terrifying. Calm? No. This isn't calm, it's clarity, carved out over 5 long years of watching the tide shift. And Henry wasn't the only threat. There was Luca, her assistant. That guy had been circling her like a hawk, too. I couldn't even remember which day it was, it all blurred together, but I stopped by her office once to grab lunch together. The door hadn't fully closed. Through the narrow gap, I saw Luca pulling up the zipper on the back of Anna's dress. Then, ever so gently, he pulled a small thermos from his lunch bag, a warm, homemade hangover remedy, apparently. Luca was always trying to impress her. She always brushed it off. At least, that's what I thought. But that evening, when I checked the takeout container the driver brought home, my soup, the one I made myself, tied with a knot only I use, was untouched. Not even the knot had been undone. That's when I knew. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about timing. Ash from my cigarette drifted down in a slow spiral, landing on my fingertips. Brian sat across from me, shaking his head with a half-smile, eyes filled with admiration. "George, I swear. I should have my clients take lessons from you." I pressed the cigarette out in the ashtray and chuckled. Wouldn't help. Most of them can't let go, and they sure as hell don't have the guts. It's always the same story, they don't want to hand over a wife like that to someone else. They tell themselves they're different, that they can still control the situation. They wait until everything's in ruins, until all the love's gone and there's nothing left but bitterness. That's when they finally act, and by then, it's too late. People want too much. They want both love and money. But chasing both? That's how you end up with neither. I'm not like them. Because I've always kept an exit strategy in my back pocket. Even in marriage. Of course, I'm going through with the divorce, but not before I make sure I have a proper meeting with dear Henry. As Anna's husband, I deserve that much. That night, at dinner, I made sure the TV in the dining room was playing Henry Rockefeller's show. The very episode Anna appeared on. She glanced up, touched her cheek casually, and teased, "What, you thought I looked beautiful that day too?" Flawless performance. No guilt. No hesitation. You'd almost believe that Maserati was just a toy car she handed out on a whim. "I've got my eye on a car," I said, watching her face closely. She didn't flinch. "Oh? You're suddenly into cars now? Which one? I'll go buy it with you." I leaned back, completely relaxed. "A Maserati Levant." Her smile faltered, just slightly, but it was there. That flicker of tension. She looked at me, eyes narrowing just a bit, gauging my mood. "I thought you were more of a Range Rover guy." I tapped the edge of the table lightly. "Fine. Then buy a Range Rover." Didn't matter which one, just had to be more expensive than the Maserati. It didn't take long before I had a little run-in with Henry Rockefeller. His Maserati collided with the front end of my Range Rover. Exactly as planned. Too bad his car wasn't built to take a hit. Henry stood by the curb, helpless and fuming, glaring at the crumpled hood of his beloved luxury toy. 2 shattered headlights. A bent bumper. The driver's door dented inward like a crushed soda can. A crowd quickly gathered around the scene, 2 high-end cars smashing into each other was bound to turn heads. Traffic officers arrived almost instantly. "Mr. Rockefeller," one of them said after reviewing the dashcam footage, "you made an illegal U-turn. The fault is entirely yours." Henry looked devastated, like he'd just lost a limb. His gaze clung to the damage on his car, eyes wide and glassy. "You couldn't have just let me go," he snapped, voice rising with frustration. "Now both our cars need repairs. What was the point?" His eyes welled up, giving him that fragile, pitiful look, trying to spin himself into the victim before anyone else could. Even the traffic officer hesitated for a second, a little thrown by his tone. A guy from the crowd muttered loud enough for everyone to hear, "What, you used to get in your way all the time, pretty boy. Dude's driving a Range Rover, you think he's worried?" Someone else chimed in with a laugh. "Nothing beats magic like stronger magic." I'd seen enough of the show by then. Finally, I opened my door and stepped out, slow and deliberate. Henry whipped around, ready to unload his anger. "You were driving like a damn snail. What, you think the road's a shopping mall? I tried to pass, but you wouldn't let me, you just blocked me on purpose, didn't you?" "I was in a rush," he continued, voice tightening. "I only hit the gas because." Then he saw me. And just like that, the words died on his tongue. His face went pale. Dead pale. I smiled, calm and collected. Must be rough, driving a car like that and still needing to hustle for a paycheck. Seems a Maserati doesn't change your fate after all. His jaw clenched so hard I thought his teeth might crack. He didn't say another word. just turned and got back into his car, slamming the door behind him. He muttered something to the officer. Just get it over with. I'll pay for the damage. The officer nodded quickly and started waving traffic back into motion. I stood there a moment longer, watching his car disappear into the flow of traffic. Then I chuckled to myself, cold and amused. I was in a hurry to finalize the divorce. But apparently, Henry was in an even bigger rush. Maybe he still hadn't gotten over the fact that I wrecked his precious Maserati. Either way, a few days later, I received a video file, forwarded from Janet's phone. The footage hit like a punch to the gut. Anna was leaning close to Henry, laughing and gesturing animatedly like she owned the room. Henry glanced at her with a boyish smile and said playfully, "Anna, which card should I play? My palms are sweating over here." She looked at him indulgently, brushing a finger over his arm. "Whichever you like. If you lose, it's on me." The people around the table burst out laughing. Henry leaned forward to study his cards, his messy bangs falling over his eyes. And Anna, gentle, instinctive, familiar, reached out to sweep the hair from his face like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Do your best," she whispered. I slammed my finger down on the screen, forcing the video to stop. My phone hit the mattress with a thud as I tossed it away in disgust. A sharp, bitter ache surged in my chest. My vision blurred, and I staggered slightly, lightheaded from the rage boiling up inside me. My fingers dug into the edge of the desk until my knuckles turned white, trying to anchor myself. If it had been anyone else, anyone but Henry, I might have considered letting her go gracefully. But this? This was something else. Not long after, Janet called in a panic. "George, oh God, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to send that video. I tried to delete it, but it was too late. I swear, it wasn't me who sent it. Please," she pleaded, "don't tell Anna. She'd kill me." My voice was calm. Too calm. "I know that wasn't you." She let out a loud sigh of relief. "Seriously, George, you're overthinking this. You know how Anna feels about you. That was just some party banter, nothing more. I'm serious, I could cheat 100 times, and Anna would never fall in love with someone like Henry." I ended the call, unimpressed. That kind of sugar-coated nonsense might have worked on someone else. But not me. Janet had been in the game too long, she knew exactly what she was saying and why. Still, she wasn't lying about one thing, she'd never dare send a video like that to my phone. No, this kind of calculated move, this subtle performance meant to provoke and humiliate, that was pure Henry. Groomed, manipulative, and oh so proud of his pedigree. A man raised in a house where poking at your opponent was an inherited skill. And that little comment from Janet, "I'll keep him steady for you," was telling. She'd clearly been interested in Henry herself. Probably held back only because she didn't want to risk stepping on Anna's toes. So it wouldn't have been hard for Henry to get his hands on her phone. I called Brian. "How is the divorce agreement being prepared? It's been a week, and it's still not ready." "Jesus, George. We're old friends. I was hoping you'd calm down by now. If I don't see my divorce papers tomorrow, I'm going to hire someone else." He groaned. "Fine. You'll have it." It was time. Time to stop playing games and sit Anna down for a real conversation. I walked straight into the executive office and got right to the point. "Anna, I need a favor." She leaned forward on her elbows, fingers interlaced, studying me carefully from across the desk. "You're my husband," she said softly. "Whatever it is, just say it." I leaned in, a cold, almost emotionless smile tugging at my lips. "Good. There's something I want from you." "What is it?" I looked her dead in the eye and said slowly, clearly, "The keys to the Maserati Levant." She froze. Her expression flickered, surprise, confusion, then frustration, all flashing across her face in a matter of seconds. We locked eyes, neither of us backing down. Finally, she let out a sigh, trying to pacify me. "George, come on. It's just a car. It's not even that expensive." Her tone was calm, but there was a patronizing edge to it, like I was being ridiculous, like I was making a scene over nothing. "You're not usually this petty," she added, her voice tinged with disappointment. I didn't bother arguing. "Anna, can you get it back or not?" Her gaze sharpened, watching me like she was trying to read between the lines. But I held my ground, unwavering. She clenched her jaw and rubbed at her temples, the way she always did when something was spiraling out of her control. Finally, she gave in. "Fine. You'll have it tomorrow. It was the first time I'd ever stripped her of dignity like that. But I didn't care. I got what I came for. Thanks, I said dryly, turning on my heel without another word. Just as my hand touched the door handle, her voice cut through the silence behind me. George, are you angry? I didn't turn around. You can think of it that way. As the door clicked shut behind me, I heard the crash of something being swept off her desk. Then a loud, dull thud, her fist slamming hard against the surface. Out in the hallway, Luca, her assistant, looked up in shock. I gave him a calm, almost amused smile as I stepped into the elevator. Perfect. Once you've made your decision, there's no need to pretend anymore. With the Maserati Levant keys in hand, I didn't waste a minute. I went straight to the TV station and arranged a meeting with Henry. We met at the cafe downstairs. He arrived late, looking worn out and tense. Losing a luxury gift must have left a sour taste in his mouth. Mr. Rockefeller, have a seat, I said, gesturing casually. His eyes immediately locked onto the car key lying next to my coffee cup. His pupils shrank, fast and sharp, like he'd taken a punch to the gut. He dropped into the seat without grace, offering a crooked, smug little smirk. Is this supposed to be some kind of power move, Mr. George? He sneered, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair in a show of defiance. Yes, Anna took the key back and gave it to you, he continued, eyes burning with frustration. But come on, someone like her, a woman of status, she's obviously going to make it up with something even more extravagant. I watched him quietly, unbothered. Of course I knew that. But that wasn't the point. He leaned in slightly. You do realize that pulling a stunt like this only made Anna look bad, right? I let him finish, then slowly pushed the Maserati key across the table toward him. To me, her pride means nothing, I said evenly. This key isn't a trophy. I didn't take it back to brag. I took it back because. I paused deliberately. His expression stiffened, suddenly wary. Because I wanted to hand it to you myself, I said with a soft chuckle. His eyes snapped to mine. What the hell do you mean by that? I took my time, letting the silence stretch before I answered. You want it? I'll give it to you, I said, voice calm and cutting. But don't you ever think you can take anything from me by force. That's not how this works, little brother. His face drained of color in an instant. His hand trembled, and coffee spilled onto the table before he hastily set the cup down. I folded my arms and looked at him with a cold, knowing smirk. At that moment, I was a porcupine with every quill raised, sharp, defensive, impossible to approach. Because yes, Henry Rockefeller was my half-brother. Same father. Different mothers. We hadn't seen each other in 20 years. So we'd both been pretending not to recognize one another. But the moment I heard his name, I knew. And at that car crash site, he'd recognized me just as fast. His target was Anna. So of course he was ready. He knew exactly who I was, he just hadn't made his move yet. He was waiting, biding his time, playing it discreet until he could take my place. If he succeeded, I could already hear him saying, George, I'm so sorry. I had no idea Anna was your wife. But I wasn't about to give him that opening. No way in hell. He could sniff around all he wanted, but if he ever got close to her, it wouldn't be because I'd failed. It would be because I chose to walk away. He wanted to pull the same trick his mother Emma used on mine all those years ago. Not a chance. Thanks to those two, I learned early on. Never let anyone catch you off guard. I'll go through with the divorce, I said coldly. But you, Henry, you'll never be Anna's husband. Because that's one of the conditions I've set in the agreement. I watched his face turn pale, inch by inch, like a slow bleed of color draining from his skin. I leaned in, twisting the knife just a little deeper. Of course, you could still settle for being her little side piece. Ask her for pocket money, play the kept man. But I imagine Emma wouldn't be too proud of that, would she? I smiled, vicious and cold. Emma had such high hopes for you. She must have dreamed you'd surpass me one day. A low-rent affair hardly lives up to that legacy, does it? Just as a flicker of hope crossed his face, I crushed it under my heel. His lips trembled, his voice shaky. George, do you really hate me that much? I was just a kid back then. I didn't choose any of that. I stared at him blankly, watching him shift gears from smug to sentimental. Then came the guilt card. Dad's felt awful all these years. He tried to reach out, you know. He said he never stopped trying. As for what happened between our moms, I don't even know what to say. But we share blood, George. We're brothers. I let out a slow, bitter laugh. Don't try that crap on me, Henry. I've already lost once in this life. That's more than enough. His expression hardened. He hadn't expected me to be so damn untouchable. He finally dropped the act. Anna told me you two haven't been happy for a long time, he said, voice colder now. She said it was mostly because of you, your expectations, your attitude. She said being with you was exhausting. I didn't deny it. Sure, I said. But you still don't stand a chance. I rose from my seat, grabbed my bag, and walked away without a glance back. Behind me, his voice echoed across the cafe, bitter and loud. George. If I'm the reason you're getting divorced, I still win. I paused just long enough to throw the final punch over my shoulder. Don't flatter yourself. At best, you were just the spark that lit the fuse. And then I was gone, calm, composed, and completely uninterested in playing his game any longer. After I got home, I started giving Anna the cold shoulder. Part of it was, obviously, pure rage. Of all the people in the world, she just had to get involved with my stepmother's son. And part of it was strategic. We were getting divorced. It'd be absurd to keep pretending everything was sunshine and roses. At some point, I needed to set the tone. A representative from the event planning company reached out to discuss the wedding setup. I told them to put everything on hold. Said I had a new idea and would get back to them. Truth was, I didn't give a damn anymore. An outdated wedding ceremony? They could keep it. Whoever still wanted it could have it. That night, I had a nightmare. In it, I was just a kid again, 3 years old. Back when I was still called George Rockefeller. Henry's mother, Emma, had been my father's secretary at the time. Ready to claw her way into a better life by any means necessary. That day is seared into my memory. Emma showed up at our house holding a sonogram printout, her pregnant belly on full display, announcing to everyone that she was carrying a boy. She declared the child to be the future heir to the Rockefeller family. Her posture was arrogant, entitled, fully aware that with a male heir inside her, she had leverage now. My mother, who had quietly devoted her life to this family, never stood a chance against a woman like Emma, sharp, manipulative, and fluent in the politics of power. My father held that ultrasound like it was a golden ticket. He didn't even try to hide his pride. He wasn't ashamed. In fact, he told Emma not to get too worked up for the baby's sake, then turned and ordered my mother to get out. She collapsed from the shock. Eventually, my grandmother had to step in to sort things out. Unlike my father, she wasn't so easily manipulated. She soothed Emma with a few polite gestures, but she pulled my mother aside and steadied her with firm words. Emily, men with money, none of them keep their hands clean. That woman's just trash trying to climb her way up. No one can shake you after you gave birth to George. To her credit, my grandmother always had a soft spot for me, her eldest grandson. Her words gave my mother something to cling to. She hesitated to leave. Mostly because, after all those years of sacrificing her career and dreams for my father, for our home, she had nothing left but me. If she left, she feared she'd lose custody. But Emma didn't stay quiet for long. After a short period of playing the dutiful woman, she started stirring up chaos again. And when my grandmother passed away from illness, Emma lost every ounce of restraint. She began parading around like she already owned the family, flaunting her pregnancy as if it gave her permanent leverage over my father. She clung to him with ruthless precision, exploiting every weak spot in his character. The deeper she embedded herself into our lives, the more she started treating the company like it was hers. Soon, she began whispering in my father's ear, convincing him that he needed to protect their unborn child. She said it was irresponsible to let money go to my mother. What if she remarried? What if that wealth became someone else's inheritance? And my father, blind, gullible, weak, believed every word Emma said. Eventually, he pushed through a brutal divorce. No negotiations. No settlements. No compassion. The result? My mother walked away with nothing. Not a cent. And because she had no independent income, no job, no assets, custody of me defaulted to the Rockefeller name. From the age of 3 to 8, 5 years, I was trapped in that house, living a life less than that of a servant. Emma became the nightmare that haunted my entire childhood. When she gave birth to Henry, her body changed, her charm faded, and my father, true to form, started chasing other women again. And that only made things worse for me. Emma took out every bit of resentment on me. Every bruise on her pride, every frustration with my father, she dumped it all on my shoulders. That mess of a childhood nearly ruined me. For years, I thought I'd never get married. I figured love was just a prettier word for collateral damage. Until I met Anna. She changed everything. Or so I thought. But now Henry wants to recreate the same nightmare his mother built. He wants to write the same script, play the same roles, like history's just a stage, and I'm meant to watch it repeat. He never asked for my permission. And I'm not going to let it happen. I won't end up like my mother, broken, discarded, and empty-handed. When Anna found out the wedding had been cancelled, she came straight to me demanding an explanation. I didn't say a word, just pulled the divorce papers from the drawer and handed them to her. "Let's get divorced," I said. She shot up from her seat like she'd been slapped. "George, are you out of your mind?" I stayed perfectly calm. "You know I'm not. You've known for years this was coming." Her chest heaved as she paced the room, arms crossed tightly across her body. "Is this about Henry? Don't be ridiculous. I know he's your brother." I snapped. I threw the divorce agreement straight at her face. "You don't know a damn thing. If you did, you wouldn't have done this." My voice cracked as it roared through the room, trembling with anger I'd tried so hard to contain. "Anna, I never thought money would turn you into this. What the hell do you even want anymore?" The paper had sliced her cheek, leaving a thin trail of blood across her skin. She stood frozen, stunned by the outburst, maybe even a little afraid. Then, after a long silence, she stepped closer and wrapped her arms tightly around me. "George, I never wanted to hurt you," she whispered. "I just wanted you to reconcile with your past. I've been struggling with whether I should push you toward that. But you figured it out before I even made up my mind." At that moment, the armor I'd been wearing for years shattered. The rage and sorrow surged so violently I couldn't hold it back. Tears spilled silently down my face, falling onto the soft shoulder pad of her blazer. "You don't understand anything, Anna," I said, voice hollow. "I do," she replied quietly. "I've known since 5 years ago, when you started seeing a therapist. George, I know everything." She clutched my shoulders, her voice breaking with pain. "You think you have the right?" I murmured. "You think you get to fix me? Have you lived through what I have? You think you get to be my savior? Those people, I wanted them all to burn in hell. And not just me. You were their victim, too. How dare you ask me to forgive them?" Anna gently wiped my tears. "George, I never betrayed you. That car? I gave it to Henry because Janet asked me to. You know how fickle she is, she wanted to chase him. That's all. He's your brother," she added softly. I shoved her away. Maybe she only saw Henry as a brother. But Henry's intentions were clear as day, he wanted to become me. "It doesn't matter anymore," I said firmly. "Anna, just sign the papers. Remember what we said when we got married? That if either of us ever felt trapped in this relationship, we'd let each other go." "George," she called out, voice strained with frustration. "I know your company's at a critical phase right now," I added, exhausted. "I won't divide your assets. I just want my shares. And one more thing, your next husband can't be Henry. That's my only condition." She glared at me, furious. "You think that's fair?" She shoved the divorce papers off the table and stormed toward me, eyes blazing red, grabbing my collar and slamming me against the wall. "What did I do to deserve this, George? Why are you so damn cruel to me?" "I'm just choosing not to test how far human nature can go," I said quietly. "One day, you'll thank me." She stared at me, long and hard, then lowered her head into my chest. Her voice was small and ragged, like an injured animal. "George, does it really have to be this way? Please, just let me go," I said. Her eyes narrowed, sharp with fury again. I met her gaze without flinching. Then she pushed me away hard, snatched up the pen, and signed her name in swift, angry strokes, never looking back at me. "You really are something, George," she spat. And she walked out, leaving the air thick with everything that had never been said. The day the paperwork was finalized, I went to my mom's place for dinner. Ever since I was 8, when she finally found a way to make a living and fought to bring me home, we depended on each other ever since. She never remarried. All her energy, all her love, went into raising me. When she saw I'd come alone, she immediately frowned. "Why didn't you bring Anna?" I knew if I told her straight up about the divorce, the entire dinner would spiral into chaos. So I kept it simple. She had a business dinner tonight. She nodded, clearly disappointed, and wasted no time diving into her usual concern, grandchildren. You two need to hurry up and have a baby, she said, grabbing my hand tightly. George, is it Anna? Is she the one using birth control? She looked at me, eyes full of worry, voice low and pleading. She used to say it wasn't the right time. Well, now what excuse does she have? Watching her fret like that, so anxious, so desperate for stability, I suddenly felt a chill creep into my bones. And for a moment, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to before. If I'd stayed married to Anna, I probably would have ended up just like my mother. Living in fear. Clutching onto the idea of a child like it was the only lifeline left. No one said yes or no, I said quietly. We were just going with the flow. Looking back now, there was only one real conversation Anna and I ever had about kids. Just one. It was years ago, in that tiny, run-down apartment we shared back when we had nothing. She curled up in my arms, clinging to me with quiet resolve. George, she whispered, I promised I'd be the perfect wife for you. But right now, I don't have time for a baby. And even if I had one, I couldn't raise it. You'd end up doing everything, and I can't bear to dump that kind of burden on you. I remember nodding after a moment of thought. I understood. She was still so young then, still full of ambition. She looked at me shyly, rubbing her nose like she always did when she felt awkward. If my startup crashes and burns, at least you'd still have options, she added softly. That one stung. I grabbed her ear and scolded her right there on the spot. Oh really, Anna? Who was it that swore we'd stick together no matter what? Grow old side by side, remember that? Options? You're already at rock bottom, sweetheart. Should I go out and make another choice right now? She burst out laughing and threw up her hands. No. I'm sorry. I take it back. Then she kissed me, slow and tender, and said, what I meant was, I don't care what we go through. Anything's fine, except you suffering. That's the only thing I won't allow. I held her so tightly that night, laughing through tears. I'm not suffering. Even if you become a legend one day, I still won't feel like I got the short end of the stick. She looked at me with a mock-serious nod. That's why I chose you. But in the end, she still made me suffer. She broke that promise, piece by piece, until there was nothing left of the woman I once believed in. 5 years ago, the first flicker of divorce entered my mind. And it wasn't because of Anna. It was because of her business partner, Miss Becky. Back then, their company had just started to take off. They'd landed a major round of venture capital, life-changing money for people who had spent years scraping by. It was sudden wealth, the kind that reshuffles priorities. And Becky was the first to crumble under the weight of it. She got herself a secret lover on the side and started pushing to liquidate her shares. She couldn't wait to cash out and start living the high life. Because the two couples were so intertwined in business, I'd grown close with Becky's husband, Chris. During those early years of the startup, he and I talked often. He used to tease me whenever he saw me working at the radio station, hosting light-hearted lifestyle segments instead of joining the company. George, I've never seen a guy so laid back, he said with a laugh. Are you sure you don't want to join in? Your wife's company could use the help. I always turned him down. Anna's got a sharp edge and a faster pace than most people can handle. The last thing she needs is me getting in her way. Chris shook his head. Aren't you worried? When the company really starts booming, she might forget everything you've done for her. He meant it as a warning, urging me to plant deeper roots in the business before it was too late. Better to establish your presence early, he said. That way, you've got a firm seat at the table when it counts. But I just smiled, unconcerned. She was broke, I didn't mind. When she's rich, I won't grovel either. And I meant it. My childhood taught me early on to detest the narrative of self-sacrifice, the role of the quiet, hard-working partner who ends up with nothing. I never believed in the romantic illusion that marriage guarantees loyalty. If it weren't for Anna, I might never have gotten married at all. Besides, I told Chris, I don't burden her. I don't guilt-trip her. I don't demand a baby from her. I give her freedom, and that's the best kind of support a man can offer. Anna wasn't the kind of woman who needed a man to succeed. She was a force of her own. Chris just shook his head with a sigh, the kind older men give when they think they've seen life clearer than you have. You're still young, George. You'll understand one day. I said nothing. Just smiled. What I did know was this: in a marriage, no one can give you a sense of security but yourself. All I ever wanted was that if the day came when we divorced, I'd have a little less regret, a little less humiliation. That was the one lesson Emma, and my mother's life, had taught me the hard way. Back then, I hadn't truly decided to walk away. Not yet. But everything changed when Becky's affair became the talk of the town. Becky and Chris, once the textbook example of a couple who'd weathered the storm together, ended up in court, tearing each other apart. Becky's new lover turned out to be no different from Emma, greedy, possessive, unwilling to let go of a single dime. Together, the two of them had been plotting behind Chris's back for months. First, Becky cashed out her shares, claiming she needed a break from business. Then, conveniently, the startup failed. Anna told me the whole story one night. Becky had begged her to play the middleman, to talk Chris into accepting the situation. Anna had looked exhausted, frustrated, and honest about what was really going on. She's just trying to shift marital assets before the divorce hits, she said with a sigh. Chris had been too slow to catch on. Too trusting. Too wrapped up in the company to notice the signs. Signs that had been there all along. Becky's affair didn't happen overnight. It had been simmering for a while. But Chris had been too busy putting out fires at work to see that his marriage was already burning down. He forgot the old truth: 40 is a dangerous age for a woman who feels ignored. On the day of the hearing, Anna and I went to court. We watched as Chris stood there, broken and furious, laying his soul bare before the judge. He talked about everything he'd sacrificed for his wife. How much he'd given, how much he'd trusted. He called her ungrateful. Cold-hearted. A traitor. But none of it mattered. In court, emotion means nothing if it's not evidence. And no matter how loud Chris shouted, a woman who no longer loves you will only toss you scraps, just enough to send you on your way. When it was over, he came over to say goodbye. His face was hollow. His spirit gutted. He didn't say much. Didn't need to. George, he said quietly, don't be like me. If she still loves you, walk away before she doesn't. Don't wait until all that's left is calculation. When guilt is gone, so is mercy. He left Manhattan's Upper East Side with a thin stack of settlement papers and never came back. As for Becky, she rode off into the sunset with her handsome young lover, building a new life from the pieces she'd torn out of someone else's. Easy, breezy, guilt-free. And Chris? He disappeared from the story altogether, just another cautionary tale of a man who waited too long to protect himself. During that time, I was in a haze, moody, restless, worn thin. Sensing my slump, Anna carved out time in her packed schedule to take me on a trip abroad. We talked for hours on the plane, knee to knee, face to face, like the old days. George, she said gently, we both knew Becky had checked out of that marriage long before the divorce happened, didn't we? I turned to look at her. So what? You think what Becky did was right? She sighed and rubbed her temples, clearly tired. That's not what I mean. I'm just saying, love isn't something we can judge. What Becky did with her assets, legally, it was all above board. That was the moment I realized Anna had fully evolved into a sharp, pragmatic businesswoman. No emotion. Just logic. Just legality. George, what are you afraid of? She asked later, teasingly pinching my cheek before we landed. Afraid I'll turn into Becky? I shrugged, playing along. Yeah. Afraid one day you won't love me anymore, and I'll walk away with nothing. She leaned into me then, resting her head on my chest, laughing softly. I'd never do that, George. Never stop loving me? Or never leave me penniless? I didn't ask. Instead, I shot back with a bit of playful bitterness, then I'll leave you while you still love me, take both your love and your money with me. She smiled, indulgent, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Fine, she said. Take it all. Just stop sulking already, okay? Deal, I said, laughing out loud. But deep down, right then and there, I made a decision. If that day ever came, I'd be the one to walk away first. And now, I had. By the time I finished playing that memory in my head, dinner was done. I sat quietly for a moment, then decided it was time to tell my mom the truth: I was getting divorced. As she cleared the dishes, she gave me her usual lecture, exasperated as ever. You should have listened to me. Now look, didn't I say this would happen? You should have had a baby already. I leaned back in my chair, tired but composed. Mom, that man you thought was yours, he made it, didn't he? And still, even after giving birth to me, you didn't get a damn thing out of it. She froze. The color drained from her face. Her lips trembled. You. My fingers curled lightly on the edge of the table. I softened my voice. I'm sorry, Mom. She stared at me for a long moment, then turned away and wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. No. I'm the one who's sorry, she said quietly. As long as you know what you're doing. I know. More than anyone, I do. Mom, I'm divorced, I said quietly. You don't have to worry about any of it anymore. I pulled out the divorce certificate and laid it on the table. She stared at it in disbelief, snatched it up, flipped it open, and staggered back a step like the air had been knocked out of her. George, she cried, pointing at me with shaking fingers. Are you trying to kill me? A divorce? Really? You think you've done something impressive now? Anna loved you, how could you just throw it all away like this? I chuckled softly, almost absent-mindedly. Mom, if I'd waited until she stopped loving me, it would have been too late. She let out a wail, pounding her chest in despair. I calmly opened a bottle of wine, poured myself a glass. Why are you crying? I'm lucky, she gave me half her fortune. So what? She snapped. That's what you wanted? Are you satisfied now? I nodded, unbothered. Yeah. I'm very satisfied. Brian was satisfied too. This divorce case had already become one of his career highlights. By tomorrow, once the media picked it up, his reputation would skyrocket. My mom stared at me with eyes full of regret. You two really can't start over? I knew she had always liked Anna, loved her, even, as the ideal daughter-in-law. But she couldn't understand. She didn't know what it meant to stand next to a woman who had climbed to the peak of power and success. When you're at the top, you stop seeing the people standing beside you. Mom, I said gently, you know something? Since the divorce, I've actually started sleeping better. She went still, then suddenly burst into tears and threw her arms around me, holding me tight. George, it's my fault, she wept. I failed you. That's why you don't believe in marriage anymore. I smiled softly and teased, come on, Mom. It's not about that. It's just. I've seen too much of what money does to people. It's always the same story, I continued. Rich wives with secret lovers, and men like Chris left in ruins. Or couples who stay together but live in silent resentment, cheating, pretending, sleeping in the same bed while dreaming separate dreams. There's no happy ending in that script. She clung to me tighter, sobbing. But George. Anna's not like that. Can't you just trust her? I shook my head slowly. Mom, do you really think being the richest woman on Manhattan's Upper East Side is Anna's final destination? It's not. No one knew better than I did how talented she was, how sharp, how fearless. Her future was too bright, so bright I could hardly look straight at it. Yes, my childhood scarred me. Yes, it made me cautious. But it also made me grateful, for my mother's pain, for her cautionary tale. Because of her, I'd spent my entire adult life protecting myself. I'd never given my heart away completely, not even in a 10-year marriage. And with Anna, I'd never once felt humiliated. Never suffered, never begged, never starved for affection. And now? Now, I had enough shares in her company to live the rest of my life in comfort and peace. There's nothing more secure in this world than money. Not love. Not marriage. Not even loyalty. Just money. I packed my bags and traveled abroad, enjoying my newfound freedom without reservation. On a brilliant coast lined with sapphire blue water, I lay under the sun, letting the heat melt away the bitterness. And just when I thought nothing could spoil the peace, my phone rang. The father who had done so many evil things actually called me. George, came his raspy voice, I heard you got divorced. Maybe it's time you came to work for my company. I'm getting old, after all, the business should belong to you boys eventually. I let out a low, sarcastic laugh. Mr. Rockefeller, are you confused, or just senile? Didn't the great Rockefeller family crumble years ago? If it hadn't, Henry wouldn't have been so overjoyed begging for a Maserati like it was a goddamn Lifetime Achievement Award. There was a sharp bout of coughing on the other end, followed by another voice, Emma's. George, don't get cocky. One day, my son will win Anna over. She's going to marry Henry. I smiled coldly. Emma, you've always had a talent for shamelessness. Then came my father's angry voice in the background. Get out of here, you disgraceful woman. Two brothers fighting over a woman, what kind of circus are you trying to run? Henry will marry whoever he wants, but it can't be Anna. Emma shrieked, have you lost your mind? Do you even know who Anna is? If it weren't for her, your pathetic company would have folded years ago. I don't care who she is. A woman who jumps from one man to another isn't good enough for my son. I laughed, sharp and bitter. I ended the call before I said anything more. The man who once glorified his mistress's son now wanted to pass the torch to me, the son he discarded. How ironic. I didn't waste another thought on those idiots. I turned back toward the beach and let the ocean erase their voices from my head. A few days later, just when I was completely immersed in the joy of doing absolutely nothing, my mother called. George, she said, Mr. Rockefeller sent some documents. Looks like property transfer papers. I raised an eyebrow. Oh. Is he dying? She sighed. Maybe he's just getting old. Maybe he's feeling guilty. I scoffed. Tell him my divorce settlement alone is more than he could earn in 2 lifetimes. Not everyone's as stingy with their first wife as he was. She hesitated, then said softly, well, it's true. He really misjudged Anna. I was about to hang up when she added, by the way. Anna's been coming by the house for dinner. Almost every day. If she has a business dinner, she sends someone to let me know. I replied dryly. She comes by more now than when you two were married, my mom added. And there's not a single tabloid rumor about her. Nothing shady. I exhaled sharply, irritation creeping into my tone. Mom, you don't need to tell me these things. And you don't need to entertain her anymore either. I ended the call without waiting for her reply. Later, to avoid receiving more calls that I never asked for, I simply turned off my phone completely. After I returned from abroad, my old friend Derek organized a class reunion and insisted I show up. I tried to get out of it, but he practically begged me to save face for him, so I had no choice but to go. And, of course, nothing fuels a reunion like a fresh pile of gossip. By the time Brian and I arrived, we hadn't even stepped through the door when we heard Nate's booming voice from inside. I knew it. I always said George and Anna wouldn't last. When they get rich, they change. It's like that every time. George must be kicking himself now, wasted years stuck in a struggling marriage and didn't even come out ahead. If he'd picked Selena back then, life would have turned out differently. Someone laughed in mock sympathy. Nate, you're just mad because you couldn't land either of them. Exactly, another voice chimed in. George is the wealthiest guy in this whole room, and don't forget, Selena's still single, by the way. But Nate wasn't ready to back down. Come on, there's no way Anna didn't do something shady. He must have caught her in the act. Sure, he got some money, but I bet he's crying in secret. A voice cut through the chatter. Yeah. Well, at least he's crying in a luxury car, with air conditioning and leather seats. Can't say the same for you, Nate. I stood at the door for a moment, listening with a faint smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. I turned to Brian, half amused. Class reunions really are something. He gave me a sheepish grin. Ignore Nate. There's always one loudmouth. Just play along, it's the 10-year reunion, and you're basically the glue holding this whole thing together. Of course. Spoken like a true lawyer. Without my name and the media buzz around my divorce, half the people in that room probably wouldn't have shown up. Honestly, I hadn't even realized my divorce had made it into the news cycle until that moment. Just then, Derek rushed out and slapped me on the back. What are you doing out here? Get in there already. The room went dead silent as soon as I stepped inside. Then, slowly, people stood up to greet me one by one. Nate lingered in the back, lips pressed tight, clearly regretting every word he'd just said. Derek, our class president and tonight's host, clapped his hands to grab everyone's attention. All right, everyone, he announced, tonight we're going all out, top shelf, no limits. And whoever's got the biggest wallet gets the honor of picking up the tab. He threw a not-so-subtle glance at me as he slung an arm around my shoulder. The room erupted in cheers and laughter, the energy instantly shifting. I gave a wry smile. If it's on me, then by all means, enjoy yourselves. Brian high-fived me across the table. George, you're a legend. Let's not waste the night. Halfway through dinner, Derek, already a little tipsy, leaned in and said, you know, I was thinking about organizing an alumni association. Thought we could make it a big thing. But then I figured, maybe not. I lowered my eyes and gave a faint smile. He was right. If Anna and I were still married, we probably could have pulled something like that off, hosted a full-scale alumni event, made it grand. But Anna and Selena were 2 grades below us. And let's be honest, some circles were never meant to overlap. A classmate came over with a drink in hand, eyes full of admiration as he raised his glass toward me. "George, out of everyone in our class, I respect you the most," he said, beaming. "You married Anna when her company was bankrupt, and walked away when she became the richest woman on the Upper East Side. That kind of guts? No one else comes close." The room burst into laughter and applause. "Well said. That's what I call bold." "George's got real style," someone else chimed in. Even Nate lifted his glass with a forced grin. "Cheers to that." I clinked glasses with him, but my expression stayed flat. I didn't respond, didn't bother feeding into it. Derek noticed the tension on my face. He stood abruptly, thumping his palm on the table. "All right, folks, let's remember, this is a reunion, not a George Hamilton biography night. Come on, let's all take a turn. 10 years, what's everyone been up to?" Brian jumped in, standing and waving his glass. "Yeah, let's not let George steal the whole spotlight." Only then did the mood shift back to something lighter, something less awkward. The energy returned, and the conversation flowed again. The room warmed with stories, laughter, and wine. I drank until my cheeks were burning red. Just as the night was winding down, a knock came at the door. A server stepped in and held it open for someone else. "You didn't really think you could host a reunion on the Upper East Side and not invite me, did you?" came the familiar voice. Anna walked in with a bright, effortless smile, radiating charm like it was a second skin. Derek glanced at me, clearly caught off guard, his face a picture of helpless innocence. "Anna, you're always so busy," he said, laughing nervously. "I didn't think you'd even have the time." A few classmates chuckled sheepishly, some of them straight up starstruck. Anna took a seat gracefully, completely at ease, brushing her hair back and offering a half-joking, half-serious smile. "Well, what can I say, no matter how busy I am, I had to make time. Otherwise, George might really leave me for good." Everyone turned to stare at me, curious, amused, some outright grinning. I sat in silence, jaw tight. What was she doing? The divorce was finalized. Surely she wasn't pretending that never happened. Derek sensed the tension again and jumped in quickly, trying to defuse the moment. "So George," he said brightly, "now that you're living the high life, what kind of woman are you looking for next?" I rubbed my chin, playing along with the setup. Probably someone sexy." The room erupted into laughter again. But across the table, Anna's smile vanished. Her face darkened instantly. And for the first time that night, she looked like she wasn't in control. Later that night, I found myself in Selena's private office, the same place I'd sat 100 times before, unraveling pieces of myself under her quiet gaze. She asked me a question, one that mirrored the conversation from the reunion. "George, you've still got a long life ahead of you. Have you ever imagined what your next partner might be like?" I tilted my head, giving it some thought. Probably someone like Anna. The way she was when she was young. Selena smiled faintly, brushing her fingers along the bridge of her nose with a soft sigh. "Well, that's brutally honest." I patted her hand gently. "I mean it, Selena. You know I do." I'd already used up every ounce of courage I had to fall in love with Anna. And no one knew that better than Selena. After all, she'd been my therapist for 5 years. She understood me more deeply than anyone else ever could. And that's exactly why I couldn't let her linger in false hope. In love, like in therapy, boundaries matter. She let out a long breath, stood up, and said, "Come on. I'll walk you to your car." We made our way down to the parking garage. As we reached the bottom floor, I stopped walking. "Selena, you should move on." I wasn't someone she could keep waiting. I'd told her the same thing 10 years ago, when I first turned down her confession. Selena's arms dropped to her sides, her expression unreadable in the shadows. She looked at me quietly, steadily, eyes locked on mine. I met her gaze. Then, suddenly, a blinding pair of headlights cut through the darkness, pinning us in their glare. A car door slammed shut. "Anna." She marched toward us in sharp, quick strides, her heels clicking against the concrete. "Well, that was fast," she said coolly. Her voice carried through the garage, cold and biting. "Found yourself a new lover already?" Her jaw clenched. Before I could speak, she grabbed my arm and yanked me behind her. And then, without hesitation, she slapped Selina across the face. The crack echoed. Selina staggered back, letting out a choked gasp, her hand flying to her cheek. "Anna, what the hell are you doing?" I shouted, lunging forward to stop her. I was in shock. I'd never expected her to actually raise a hand. Chest heaving, Anna tightened her grip on my arm and glared at Selina with icy fury. She deserved it. I clenched my fists, seething. "You don't get to hit people. I don't care what you think she did." Anna didn't even flinch. "She played me," she said through gritted teeth. "Tell me, Selina, was it fun? Was it satisfying watching me fall for your little act?" Selina stood still, hands still pressed to her face, a faint smirk tugging at her lips as her shoulders shook with a low, bitter laugh. "I did play you," she said quietly. "And I warned you not to try that trick. Not everyone can rise from the ashes after being pushed to the edge." The tension in the air was electric. I looked between them, slowly piecing together what I'd just stepped into. Anna had been in contact with Selina. Selina had set her up. But why? What exactly had she done? And how long had this been happening right under my nose? I stood in silence, questions piling in my mind, unsure which betrayal cut deeper, Anna's rage or Selina's game. Anna dragged me down to the riverfront. The wind was strong. She brushed a few strands of hair away from her face, then looked at me softly, her voice almost whispering. "Selina told me you had deep psychological trauma," she said. "She said you'd never truly trust me, or this marriage, until you reconciled with your past. With your family." She paused for a moment, searching my expression. "And when Henry's show invited me, I thought maybe it was a chance. A way to ease into that. Janet was chasing after him at the time, and I didn't want her playing around with your brother for fun, so I pretended to be close to him. I thought it might help, somehow." Her voice cracked. "But now I know. Selina lied to me. You were never going to forgive them. And everything I did just pushed you further away. So that was it." The full story behind Henry. Anna had known all along about the cracks in our marriage. She hadn't been clueless, just desperate to fix something she couldn't understand. "George," she said softly, eyes clouded with regret, "none of them matter to me. I just want to be with you. Can't you see that?" I looked at her, at this woman who once made me believe love could overpower everything, and I almost laughed. Selina, she did have a persuasive tongue. This sounded exactly like something she'd plant in someone's mind. Even Anna, shrewd, sharp, logical Anna, had fallen for it. But now that the truth was out, what difference did it make? I didn't regret leaving. Not one bit. "Anna," I said coldly, "thank you for telling me all of this. But going forward, you and I, we're not walking the same path anymore." Her face contorted in disbelief, then in panic. She grabbed my arm tightly. "George. Did I not explain it clearly enough? I'll call Henry right now, we can clear this up." Her voice broke. "Or is it because I'm too rich? Is that it? Fine, I'll file for bankruptcy." "Don't be ridiculous." I snapped. "I just can't afford to gamble anymore," I said through clenched teeth. "It's not about not trusting you. It's about not trusting human nature. Do you get that, Anna?" She couldn't. She wouldn't. The road ahead of her was paved in gold, money, power, and ambition. But I'd seen what lies beneath that glittering surface. Blood. Regret. Collapse. And I wasn't about to argue with her over it. To her, it was paranoia. To me, it was self-preservation. I took a deep breath and looked her in the eye. "I'm genuinely happy now, Anna. Please, just let me go." She stared at me like I'd just said something incomprehensible, her body trembling ever so slightly. "George, is being with me again really that painful for you?" I didn't look away. I answered plainly. "These last 5 years. I haven't been happy for a single day." That silenced her. We parted on bitter terms, our words still echoing between us. I saw the disappointment in her eyes, the way she'd convinced herself that a heartfelt explanation would make everything right again. But I wasn't going to bury myself in marriage just to make someone else feel better. I thought I'd made myself perfectly clear. But I'd underestimated one thing: Anna was never the kind of woman who gave up easily. When she realized she couldn't get through to me directly, she turned her attention to someone else, my mother. Suddenly, my mom started showing up at my apartment more than usual, bringing homemade meals, chatting non-stop, and subtly acting as Anna's spokesperson. What was this? Some kind of strategy to keep me too busy to pursue anyone new? Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. Rubbing my temples, I finally asked, "Mom, don't you think you've been a little too enthusiastic lately?" She blinked, caught off guard, then gave a sheepish laugh. "Are you saying I look younger now?" Anna gave me a spa membership, a gym pass, and even signed me up for some hobby classes. It's been so much fun. So that was it. Anna wasn't just winning her way back, she was rebranding my mother's entire lifestyle. Once upon a time, my mom was more anxious than I was, always worrying about marriage, always nagging me to have a child to secure the relationship. Now she was glowing, energized, socially active, and clearly operating on a new frequency. Anna's methods really were something else. I needed an escape. I called up Brian and invited him out to dinner, just to catch my breath. When I vented about the whole situation, he listened patiently before cutting right to the heart of it. "She's not just charming your mom, she's trying to bring you out of your slump too. Honestly, George, it's a smart move. She's being strategic, she's playing the long game." Then he raised a brow, half joking, half curious. "You really feel nothing? Not even a little tempted?" I shook my head without hesitation. Not at all. But truth be told, what I felt was exhaustion. No matter how a marriage ends, it never ends cleanly. Either you break down and become strangers, bitter, irreconcilable, unable to even be in the same room. Or you part ways like Anna and I did, still polite, still civil, but leaving behind a mess of unfinished emotions. There's always one person who refuses to let go. And the longer I thought about it, the more I realized I had to cut this off completely. So I called Anna. This time, I decided to speak her language, rational, business-minded, transactional. "Anna," I said, "if you see our remarriage as a reinvestment opportunity, then I need to tell you, the risk assessment didn't pass. I'm not willing to take that gamble." There was silence on the line for a few long seconds. I could almost hear the wheels turning in her mind. "George," she finally said, her voice tight, "is that really how you see us? Just another business model? Can't you trust me, just once?" "I'm not saying the project wouldn't succeed," I replied calmly. "But I've decided not to invest. And I'm willing to accept the cost of that decision." I meant every word. Because if love had become a negotiation, then I had already made my final offer, and walked away from the table. There was no going back for me and Anna. The moment I took that final step toward divorce, I understood it better than anyone else ever could. On the phone, she let out a cold laugh. "George, it's obvious how much effort you're putting in, just to convince me to let you go." I didn't respond. Before hanging up, I simply said, "You gave me more grace and dignity than most people ever get in a divorce, Anna. I won't stand in your way now. But I do hope you can find peace sooner rather than later." Later that night, my mom stood by the doorway, looking heartbroken and helpless. "George, you're so rational, so resolute. You've really left her no hope at all." I offered a quiet smile. Maybe I should never have gotten married in the first place. If I'd realized earlier just how ill-equipped I was to carry the weight of marriage, maybe none of this would have happened. Anna appeared on Henry's show again. But this time, she looked completely different. Gone was the sharp, executive power suit. She'd lost weight. She wore a sleek, form-fitting evening gown, elegant, sultry, striking. Derek called me just to tease. "George, I never realized Anna had that kind of figure. All those years in business wear didn't do her justice. What, is she dressing sexy now just in case you really go looking for that kind of woman?" I didn't bother responding. By now, Anna's attempts to win back her ex-husband had become public gossip on the Upper East Side. Everyone was watching to see who would break first, me or her. But honestly, it wasn't even about love anymore. It had become a matter of pride, Anna refusing to concede. Ironically, Henry looked visibly uncomfortable during the interview, far less relaxed than before. "Anna, you've been looking very feminine lately," he said awkwardly. Anna gave a cool, almost self-deprecating smile. "Nothing special. Just wanted someone to see I'm not lacking in the looks department either." Henry forced a polite chuckle, clearly flailing. "Sounds like congratulations are in order. New romance, maybe?" "Thanks," she said flatly. "I'll take your good wishes." Her answers were clipped, cold, and distant, so terse that Henry almost couldn't keep the show moving. Even my mom had her reading glasses on, watching the screen with full attention. When the show ended, she turned to me and asked, "Is Anna trying to send a message for your sake?" I rolled my eyes. "Mom, weren't you supposed to be focusing on self-care? Go get your beauty sleep." She stood, stretching with a tired sigh. "Oh please, I'm too old to understand how you young people do things anymore." But just before heading to bed, she paused at the doorway. I walked up and looked at her seriously. "Thank you, Mom. Seeing you like this really makes me happy." And I meant it. She patted my shoulder warmly. "George, it's about time I started living for myself too. Actually, there's someone I'd like you to meet soon." I blinked in surprise. "Really?" She looked slightly bashful, something I hadn't seen in years. "I met him at the gym. It's been a little while now. I just didn't know how to bring it up." "Why not?" "That's great news, Mom." I was genuinely happy for her. But later, just before she turned off the lights, she couldn't help herself. "George," she said softly from the hallway, "I'm starting over. I'm not afraid of the future anymore. Maybe you could give Anna another chance, too?" I took a long breath and smiled gently, if a little bittersweet. "Mom, you don't need to carry guilt. If what happened when I was a kid really left a scar, I promise you, it's shaped me for the better, not broken me. Believe me when I say, I'm truly okay being alone." And I meant it. For the first time in years, I was really, truly, happy. So happy. I didn't even want a second option. That day, after wrapping up my segment at the station, I stepped out into the parking lot and found Luca waiting beside my car. I rolled down the window. He walked over and, with his usual stiff politeness, handed me a file folder. "Mr. George, this is the supplier shortlist and bid conference for the new quarter," he said. "Anna hopes you'll agree to host it." I took the folder and flipped through it casually. Sure enough, there it was, Stellar Foods. The small food company my father and Henry had spent decades running. The same business that once gave my father enough pride and power to walk out on his marriage and abandon his son. And now, after all these years, they'd ended up here, lined up to bid for a seat at the table, under my name. I couldn't help but laugh silently. There was a strange mix of satisfaction and irony curdling in my chest. Luca added quickly, as if sensing my thoughts, "You don't need to worry, Mr. George. The procurement manager will assist you throughout the event." I nodded and accepted Anna's gesture for what it was. As long as she didn't bring up reconciliation, I'd keep my word, I wouldn't stand in her way. And truth be told, I didn't mind facing the Rockefeller family again. I tossed the file onto the passenger seat and glanced at Luca. "You've been glowing lately," I said, half teasing. "Something good on the horizon?" Luca looked a little embarrassed, then hesitated before reaching into his bag and pulling out a formal invitation card. "I'm getting married next month," he said shyly. "I'd be honored if you could attend." I stared at him for a long moment, not saying a word. Under my gaze, Luca started to sweat. He lowered his head slightly, voice quieter now. "Mr. George, if I've ever been out of line before, I hope you'll forgive me." I gave a low chuckle, not saying yes, not saying no. Luca had, in fact, rubbed me the wrong way more than once in the past. I'd never forgotten that. But this invite, this quiet gesture, this was the real reason he was waiting in a parking lot instead of having someone from the events team deliver the documents. Anna was tightening the bolts again. She'd started cleaning up everything, every person, every detail, every past discomfort I'd once silently endured. Making amends on behalf of things that couldn't be undone. I wasn't unmoved by it. But still, it was only that. A gesture. Nothing more. As co-owners of the company, maybe it was for the best that we could smooth things over. Not for love, not for nostalgia, just for the health of the business. And in the end, that was more than most people ever managed. At the supplier conference, I sat confidently at the head of the table. And it wasn't just because of Anna. With half the company's equity in my hands, my place at the helm was indisputable. The entire Rockefeller family showed up in full force. Just as Emma had said on the phone that day, without Anna, Stellar Foods would have gone under long ago. The moment the conference ended, they invited me to dinner. As soon as I took my seat, Anna walked in right behind me and sat down beside me without hesitation. She leaned in and asked softly, "George, how did the meeting go?" I was busy all day and didn't have a chance to find out. Completely ignoring the awkward scene across the table, Emma, Henry, and my father had all stood up, visibly unsure whether they should greet her or not. I held back a smirk. It went great, I replied casually. Had a lot of fun, actually. Henry cleared his throat and sat back down, his fists clenched beneath the table. Emma's face was already twitching with rage, her jaw tightening, eyes darting between Anna and me. George. Anna, you two are divorced, but you still seem awfully close, she finally said, slipping into that forced, superior tone older relatives love to use. I couldn't be bothered to answer. Anna glanced at her calmly. Thanks for your concern. We're just playing around, our divorce was just a little game. I couldn't help but let out a short laugh. At least we divorced with grace. Not like some people, who clawed their way in as mistresses, only to end up in bitter, loveless marriages. Even their children grow up learning how to scheme. Emma's face twisted in fury, lips trembling as she shot up from her seat, jabbing a finger in our direction. Anna. George. You. But Anna's face turned cold. Henry scrambled to salvage the situation, lifting his glass awkwardly. Anna, we really appreciate your continued support of our company over the past year. We'll be rolling out some new products soon, and we hope. Anna rested her chin on one hand, eyes half-lidded, completely unmoved. Our company has always upheld a strict standard of fairness and transparency when selecting suppliers, she said coolly. If you believe in your product, then that's a good start, Mr. Henry. Everyone in the room knew the truth, Stellar Foods was already teetering on the edge of collapse. If Henry really had confidence, he wouldn't have given up his silver spoon to host a late-night cooking show on a small regional network just to save face. But that's what desperation looks like, well-dressed, well-spoken, and hollow at the core. Henry's face had gone pale, tinged with a sickly shade of green. He turned to me helplessly. George, the company is partly yours too. You. Mr. Rockefeller jumped in immediately, his voice overly eager. George, your brother is right. Just let us know when you have time, we'll get the company transferred. I smiled faintly. No need for that, Mr. Rockefeller. Whatever schemes you've cooked up, save them for your son. The old man coughed violently, face flushed with anger. Emma's eyes burned with fury as she shrieked, George. Even when he offered you half the company, I didn't say a word. Now you're playing hard to get? What have you ever done for this company? I looked at her coldly. Right, so you send Henry to cozy up to Anna. Keep the company afloat and marry into money at the same time. How convenient. Henry fumbled, desperate to defend himself. George, it's not like that. You've misunderstood. Before he could finish, Emma cut him off, her voice sharp and bitter. Don't apologize. He's just upset Anna didn't fall for his trap. It was all a setup, she lured you in, then tossed you aside. Ah. Classic Emma. Same old tactics. Loud, irrational, shameless. She'd been pulling this act for decades, slinging mud first and asking questions never. And from the outside, you'd almost believe it. To anyone who didn't know better, it might even look like Anna seduced me, got bored, and threw me away, leaving poor Henry in the dirt. But before I could respond, Anna stood up, slamming her palm on the table. She pulled out her phone and tossed it in front of Henry, voice ice cold. You were the one who asked me to play along with Janet that day, because you were too scared to offend her. You asked me to act like we were flirting, remember? The color drained from Henry's face. I stared at him, piecing together the rest of the puzzle. So that video, that damn video that tore a hole in my marriage, was his own production all along. I let out a low, bitter laugh. No, you weren't afraid of Janet. That was just an excuse. The real plan was to stir up trouble between me and Anna. Make her look like she crossed a line. Get us divorced. Henry's face flushed deep red. He looked around, flustered, desperate for a way to claw back control. But his eyes still clung to Anna, like she was his last chance, his final card. Anna turned to me, regret flickering in her eyes. George, I was blind. If he'd just told me you were his brother, Janet wouldn't have dared touch him. Emma was speechless now, her face crushed, her dignity shattered. And Mr. Rockefeller. He snapped. Pointing at his wife and son, he shouted, You useless woman. You've been a disgrace from the start, and now you've ruined him too. Before he could say another word, his face turned ghostly white. His eyes rolled back, and he collapsed backward in his chair. Emma and Henry scrambled to catch him, panic erupting. Chaos descended instantly. I stepped aside, calmly dialing emergency services. Then I walked out with Anna. We didn't drive. We just walked. Aimlessly, slowly, side by side under the city lights. Only after several blocks, when the adrenaline finally faded and my thoughts settled, did I turn to her. "So," I said quietly, "I guess you're done trying to convince me to reconcile with my family?" Anna looked at me, weary but gentle. "No," she said softly, "I've finally seen them for who they are. There's not a single decent person in that family. They don't deserve you." She paused, then added, "George. I'm sorry." And for the first time in a long while, I believed she truly meant it. Anna and I still had no intention of getting back together. And truth be told, I'd never felt more at ease, living freely, on my own terms. Oddly enough, Anna seemed increasingly at peace too. People around us still whispered, of course, some with curiosity, others with mockery. Someone once sneered, "All this time, and you still haven't won George back. Careful, you might spend the rest of your life just working for him." Anna didn't flinch. She just smiled and replied calmly, "I don't mind. I chose this." And in that moment, I realized. Sometimes, dignity isn't about who holds the upper hand. It's about knowing your own heart, and standing by your choice. And for both of us, that was enough.